Woman nursed a wolf back to health. But what happened 2 years later shocked the entire town. How does a person rebuild themselves when the pieces of their past no longer fit? The question churned in Elena's mind as she stood on the porch of her new home, a cabin perched on the edge of the Montana wilderness. The air was sharp with the tang of pine, and the sun, half hidden by towering evergreens, cast long shadows that stretched out like ghosts of the life she had left behind. Her breath rose in small, uncertain clouds as she stepped onto the frost-kissed ground, scanning the unbroken silence around her. Solitude had been her choice, her sanctuary, or so she told herself. Yet here, in a world indifferent to her pain, loneliness felt like an unwelcome guest. The divorce had gutted her, leaving behind a woman she hardly recognized. 25 years of shared dreams, now reduced to legal documents and half-remembered arguments, had sent her fleeing to this remote place, miles from the nearest neighbor. Her friends had called it drastic, her family had called it reckless, but Elena had called it necessary. If she couldn't fix what was broken, she could at least escape the noise of the world long enough to hear her own thoughts. Days here passed differently, measured not by clocks, but by the rhythms of nature. Mornings brought the chirping of birds, afternoons were marked by the rustling wind through the trees, and night fell with an almost oppressive stillness, broken only by the occasional distant howl of a wolf. Those howls intrigued and unsettled her in equal measure, a reminder of the wilderness's untamed heart. She had read about wolves, how they were both feared and revered, symbols of freedom yet hunted for their power. Their duality resonated with her. In some ways, she felt like a wolf herself, wounded, yet yearning for a life unshackled by expectations. One chilly afternoon, as Elena ventured deeper into the woods with a satchel of supplies and her trusty walking stick, she heard a sound that didn't belong. A faint whimper, almost drowned out by the wind, tugged at her ears. She paused, scanning the forest floor, her heartbeat quickening as the sound grew louder. Following it, she stumbled upon a grim sight. A crude, rusted trap clamped tightly around the leg of a small gray wolf cub. Its fur was matted with blood, and its wide, pain-filled eyes locked onto hers. Elena froze, the image searing into her mind. The cub whimpered again, thrashing weakly against the trap. Without thinking, she dropped to her knees beside it. Her hands trembled as she reached out, then hesitated. She had no idea how to free the creature without causing it more pain. But leaving it here to die was unthinkable. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. "I won't hurt you." Whether the wolf understood her words or sensed her intent, it stopped struggling, its shallow breaths fogging in the cold air. The trap was old but vicious, its teeth biting deep into the cub's leg. It took all her strength to pry it open, and when she finally freed the wolf, it let out a pitiful yelp before collapsing onto the snow. Panic surged through Elena. She wrapped the cub in her scarf and cradled it against her chest, feeling its rapid heartbeat against her own. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The journey back to the cabin was agonizingly slow. The cub was heavier than it looked, and its low whimpers of pain were a constant reminder of the fragility in her arms. When she finally reached the cabin, she laid it gently on a blanket by the fire, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "What am I doing?" she muttered to herself as she rummaged through her supplies, searching for anything that could serve as a bandage. She found an old first aid kit and returned to the wolf, who watched her with wary, glassy eyes. Tending to the wound was grueling. The cub flinched and growled weakly as she cleaned the gash, and more than once she had to stop to steady her nerves. Blood stained her hands and the blanket, and she bit back tears, unsure whether they were for the wolf or herself. When the bandage was finally secure, she sat back on her heels, exhaustion and adrenaline warring within her. The wolf had fallen into a fitful sleep, its chest rising and falling unevenly. She stayed up all night watching over it, feeding the fire to keep the cabin warm and checking the wolf's breathing every few minutes. It was absurd, she thought, how quickly she had become attached to this fragile, wild thing. She had no idea whether it would survive the night, but the thought of giving up on it felt like a betrayal. It reminded her too much of her own struggles, how easy it was for others to walk away when things got hard. When morning came, Elena was startled awake by a soft sound, a tentative, almost questioning whimper. She opened her eyes to find the cub looking at her, his head resting on the blanket. It wasn't the fierce glare she had seen in the forest, but something softer, almost trusting. "Well, look at you," she said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Over the next few days, Elena cared for the cub with a single-minded determination that surprised even her. She hunted through old books for advice on nursing injured animals and scoured the forest for fresh meat to supplement its diet. Each small improvement, the way it began to nibble at food, how it tested its weight on the injured leg, filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She named him Ash, for the color of his fur and the resilience he seemed to embody, rising from the brink of death like a phoenix from its ashes. The bond between them deepened as the weeks passed. Ash would follow her around the cabin, limping but determined, and she found herself talking to him as though he could understand. She told him about her divorce, her regrets, and the dreams she had buried long ago. He was a silent companion, but his presence soothed a part of her that she hadn't realized was still raw. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Elena stared into the flickering flames, her hand resting lightly on Ash's head. "Maybe we're not so different, you and I," she said softly, "both a little broken, trying to figure out where we belong." Ash looked up at her, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight, and in that moment, she felt something shift within her, a fragile hope, like the first green shoot breaking through the snow. The wilderness had taken so much from her, but it had also given her something unexpected, a chance to heal, not alone, but with a kindred spirit who understood, in his own way, what it meant to fight for survival. The days stretched into weeks, and with each passing moment, Ash grew stronger. Elena watched in awe as the tiny cub who once whimpered in pain began to stand on his injured leg, his movements cautious but determined. His resilience reminded her of the towering pines surrounding the cabin, scarred by wind and weather, yet unyielding. It wasn't long before Ash began to explore the cabin, his curious nose sniffing every corner, his amber eyes bright with intelligence, and something Elena could only describe as gratitude. The silence that once haunted her now felt alive, punctuated by the soft sound of paws on wooden floors or the occasional low whine when Ash needed her attention. Elena's days became a rhythm dictated by Ash's recovery. She woke early to check his bandages, prepare food, and ensure his injured leg was healing. Hunting wasn't an option for Ash yet, so she ventured into the woods with traps of her own, catching small game to supplement his meals. It was a task she once dreaded, but now it gave her a sense of purpose. She found herself more attuned to the forest, noticing the subtle changes in the air that signaled an approaching storm or the distant rustle of deer moving through the underbrush. Ash was becoming her partner in this life, his recovery mirroring her own journey to rebuild after the devastation of her divorce. There were moments of frustration, of course. Ash was still a wild creature, and as his strength returned, so did his instincts. He would grow restless inside the cabin, pacing by the door and whining softly as if calling out to the wilderness that beckoned him. Elena knew he longed for the freedom he had been born into, and she dreaded the day she would have to let him go. For now, though, she kept him close, reassuring herself that his trust in her was enough to hold him back. She talked to him constantly, her voice filling the once empty spaces of her life. She told him stories of her childhood, of the dreams she had abandoned and the love she had lost. Ash would tilt his head as if listening, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel less alone. As the seasons shifted, so did Ash. His coat grew thicker, his muscles stronger, and his gait more confident. Elena began to take him outside for short walks, keeping a careful eye on his injured leg. At first, he stayed close, his nose brushing against her hand as they moved through the forest, but as his strength returned, he started to venture farther, testing his boundaries like a child exploring a new world. Elena watched him with a mix of pride and trepidation, knowing that each step away from her was a step closer to the life he was meant to live. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun filtered through the trees and golden streams, Ash caught his first scent of prey. They were walking near a small clearing when his body went rigid, his ears pricked forward, and his nose quivered. Elena followed his gaze to a rabbit frozen in the grass, its brown fur blending seamlessly with the earth. Before she could react, Ash bolted, his injured leg moving in a blur as he pursued the rabbit. Elena's heart leapt into her throat. She called out to him, but he didn't stop, his instincts overtaking the months of careful nurturing. The rabbit darted into the underbrush, and Ash disappeared after it, leaving Elena standing alone in the clearing, her voice echoing in the stillness. Panic gripped her as she raced after him, her boots crunching through fallen leaves. She called his name, her voice breaking, but there was no response. The forest felt vast and indifferent, every shadow and sound a reminder of how small she was in this untamed world. Just as fear began to twist into despair, she heard a rustling ahead. She pushed through a tangle of branches and found Ash standing over the rabbit, his chest heaving and his eyes wide with triumph. The rabbit was unharmed, trembling but alive, and Ash seemed as surprised as she was by his success. Elena knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she reached for his collar. "You scared me," she whispered, her voice thick with relief. Ash licked her hand, his tail wagging slightly, and for the first time, she realized the inevitability of his wildness. After that day, Elena began to prepare herself for the moment she would have to let him go. She started teaching Ash to hunt, guiding him through the skills he would need to survive on his own. It was a painful process, each lesson a reminder that their time together was finite. Yet it was also beautiful, watching him reclaim the instincts that had been dulled by injury and captivity. He became more independent, spending hours exploring the forest, while she tended to the cabin and worked on her own projects. She began carving small wooden figurines, her hands finding solace in the repetitive motion of the knife against the wood. One of her first carvings was a wolf, its form rough but unmistakably inspired by Ash. Their bond deepened in those months, a quiet understanding passing between them. Ash would return from his adventures with burrs in his fur and stories in his eyes, and Elena would greet him with a soft smile and a warm meal. At night, he would curl up by the fire, his presence a steady comfort in the shadows. But as winter approached and the first snowflakes fell, Elena noticed a change in him. He began to spend more time at the edge of the forest, his nose lifted to the wind, his body tense with an energy she couldn't contain. The wilderness was calling him, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he answered. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Elena reached out to stroke his fur, her fingers lingering on the scar left by the trap. "You've given me so much," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the flames. "More than I ever thought I deserved." Ash looked at her, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that he understood. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this: whatever happened, they had saved each other. The snow began to fall more heavily in the days that followed, blanketing the forest in a quiet stillness. Ash's explorations grew longer, and Elena found herself standing on the porch, watching the trees for his return. Each time he came back, her heart swelled with relief, but she knew the day was coming when he wouldn't. She tried to steel herself for that moment, but the thought of losing him felt like losing a part of herself. Still, she reminded herself that love, true love, meant letting go. And so she waited, savoring each moment, knowing that their bond, though forged in solitude, was something that would endure even in absence. The day started like any other. The forest wrapped in a misty quiet as Elena brewed her morning coffee. Ash had been gone since dawn, his growing independence pulling him farther into the wilderness each day. She tried not to worry, telling herself this was natural, that he was only answering the call of his instincts. Yet as the hours stretched on and the sun began to dip behind the trees, a familiar knot of unease tightened in her chest. She stepped onto the porch, her hands clutching the edge of her sweater as she scanned the tree line. The forest was still, its silence broken only by the distant caw of a crow. Ash always returned by sundown, his fur dusted with leaves and his eyes alight with stories she could only imagine. But tonight, the woods felt emptier, and Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. When Ash finally emerged from the trees, his movements were slow, deliberate. Elena rushed down the steps to meet him, her relief giving way to concern as she noticed the tension in his posture. He wasn't alone. A small group of deer stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, their heads raised, ears twitching. Ash turned to look at them, then back at Elena, his amber eyes filled with an intensity she hadn't seen before. It was as if he were caught between two worlds, one that bound him to her and one that called him away. The deer bolted, their white tails flashing like ghosts in the fading light, and Ash took a single step forward before stopping himself. He turned back to Elena, his breath visible in the cold air, and in that moment, she understood. The next morning, she found herself standing in front of the old wooden chest in her bedroom, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside were items she hadn't touched in years, maps of the surrounding area, a sturdy hiking pack, and a pair of weathered boots she'd worn during her first few months here. She pulled them out, along with a heavy coat and gloves, and began packing. If she was going to let Ash go, it had to be on her terms. She couldn't simply release him into the unknown and hope for the best. She needed to take him somewhere safe, somewhere he could thrive without the looming threat of human interference. Her decision wasn't entirely selfless. She knew that keeping Ash here, within the fragile bubble of their companionship, was as much for her benefit as it was for his. But the rumors from the nearby farms had grown louder in recent weeks. Stories of a wolf spotted near livestock, of tracks found too close to barns. The wildlife authorities had visited her cabin twice now, their questions polite but pointed. Elena had defended Ash fiercely, insisting he posed no threat, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. It was only a matter of time before someone took matters into their own hands. By midday, she had everything ready. The plan was simple. She would take Ash deep into the protected wilderness, far beyond the reach of human settlements, and give him the freedom he deserved. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best she could offer. Ash watched her preparations with quiet curiosity, his head tilting as she checked the straps on her pack and filled a small cooler with supplies. When she crouched down to secure his collar and leash, a precaution she hoped she wouldn't need, he licked her hand, his trust in her unwavering. The journey was harder than she had anticipated. The trail she followed was steep and rugged, winding through dense forest and across icy streams. Ash moved beside her with a grace that made her envy his ease in this environment, his paws leaving delicate imprints in the snow. They stopped occasionally to rest, sharing water and small pieces of dried meat. Elena found herself talking to him as they walked, her voice breaking the stillness of the forest. She told him about her plans, about how she hoped he would find a pack, a purpose, a life beyond the confines of her cabin. She didn't know if he understood, but the act of speaking her thoughts aloud made the weight of them easier to bear. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew colder, the trees sparser. Elena began to doubt herself. What if this wasn't the right choice? What if she was condemning him to a life of hardship, of loneliness? She stopped to catch her breath, leaning against a tree as tears stung her eyes. Ash nudged her hand with his nose, his eyes searching hers as if to say, "We've come this far. Don't give up now." She smiled through her tears, scratching behind his ears. "You always were the brave one," she whispered. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing that opened onto a sweeping view of the valley below. The landscape stretched endlessly, a patchwork of snow-covered trees and jagged peaks bathed in the golden light of sunset. It was beautiful, wild and unforgiving, a place where Ash could belong. Elena knelt in the snow and unclipped his leash, her hands trembling. Ash stayed by her side, his head resting against her shoulder, as if sensing her hesitation. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. "I love you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I hope you know that." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then with a soft nudge, Ash stepped away from her embrace. He looked at her one last time, his amber eyes filled with something she could only describe as gratitude, before turning toward the forest. Elena watched as he disappeared into the trees, his gray coat blending seamlessly with the shadows. She stayed there long after he was gone, the cold seeping into her bones as the reality of his absence settled over her. The trek back to the cabin was a blur, her mind replaying the moment over and over like a reel stuck on repeat. She had done the right thing, she told herself. She had given him a chance at the life he deserved, But as she stepped onto the porch and opened the door to the now quiet cabin, the emptiness hit her like a physical blow. The silence that once felt peaceful now felt oppressive, the space too big for one person. She wandered through the rooms, her eyes lingering on the places Ash used to claim as his own. The rug by the fire, the corner near the window where he would watch the snowfall. That night she lay awake, her mind restless with questions she couldn't answer. Had he found safety? Was he scared, hungry, alone? The bond they had shared was something she hadn't thought possible, and letting go of it felt like losing a piece of herself. Yet as she stared at the ceiling, she reminded herself of what she had seen in his eyes as he left. Strength, determination, and something that looked an awful lot like hope. In the weeks that followed, she tried to settle into a new routine. She threw herself into her carvings, creating intricate pieces inspired by the wilderness around her. She began volunteering with local conservation groups, sharing her story in small, careful pieces. But every so often, she would find herself standing at the edge of the forest, her eyes scanning the tree line for a flash of gray. And though Ash never appeared, she liked to believe he was out there, thriving in the freedom she had given him. The reports came in whispers at first, carried on the wind like rumors too dangerous to speak aloud. A rogue wolf, larger than most, had been sighted near livestock on the outskirts of the valley. Tracks pressed into the snow like warnings. A few missing sheep, a calf found dead, its remains picked clean. The townsfolk were afraid and fear bred anger. Elena heard their murmurs at the general store when she ventured into town, her head low beneath the brim of her hat. "It's just a matter of time before that beast comes closer," one farmer said, his voice tight with frustration. "We have to act before it costs us more." Elena's heart tightened with each word, a creeping certainty settling over her. She didn't need to ask questions or see the tracks herself. Deep down, she knew it was Ash. It had to be. For days, she tried to ignore the knot of unease growing in her chest, telling herself it wasn't her responsibility. She had let him go, given him back to the wild. Whatever path he had chosen wasn't hers to interfere with. But the thought of him out there, hunted and misunderstood, gnawed at her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his amber gaze, the unspoken trust they had shared. She owed him more than silence. The decision came suddenly, like a gust of wind snapping through the trees. Elena packed her bag with the precision of someone who had done this before. Heavy boots, thick gloves, a flashlight, and a map worn soft at the edges. She checked her rifle twice before slinging it over her shoulder, though she prayed she wouldn't need it. When the ranger arrived, Jason, a quiet man with sharp eyes and an easy way of blending into the background, he didn't ask why she wanted to go. He just nodded, shouldering his own pack as they set off into the forest. The first day was uneventful, the trail winding steadily upward into the mountains. The snow crunched beneath their boots, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Jason kept his distance, letting Elena lead, though she knew he was watching her closely. She appreciated his silence, the way he seemed to understand that this was something she needed to do, even if she couldn't fully explain why. By the second day, the terrain had grown more treacherous. The snow deepened, clinging to her boots and slowing their pace. The forest closed in around them, its branches heavy with frost, casting long shadows in the pale light. They found tracks in the snow, wolf tracks, fresh and deep. But they weren't alone. A second set of prints followed close behind, smaller but unmistakably human. Hunters. The realization sent a chill down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Think they're close?" she asked, her voice low. Jason knelt beside the tracks, brushing snow away with his gloved hand. "Close enough to worry about," he said, glancing up at her. "If we find him first, we might have a chance to warn them off." They pressed on, the urgency in their steps pushing them farther into the wilderness than Elena had gone before. The forest grew wilder, its paths less defined, and the sounds of civilization faded into the distance. As dusk fell, they made camp beside a frozen stream, the sky above them painted in streaks of orange and purple. Jason built a small fire, the flames crackling softly as they sat in its glow. "Why are you really here?" he asked, breaking the silence. Elena hesitated, her hands tightening around the mug of coffee she had poured from a thermos. "I owe him," she said finally. "Ash saved me in ways I can't explain. If there's even a chance I can return the favor, I have to try." Jason nodded, his expression thoughtful. Wolves don't usually stay alone for long. If he survived this long, there's a good chance he's found a pack. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but the tension in her chest wouldn't ease. She lay awake that night, listening to the distant howls that echoed through the trees. They sounded close and far away all at once, like voices calling from another world. On the third day, they found blood. It stained the snow in uneven patches, a trail leading off into the trees. Elena's stomach turned as she followed it, her breath visible in the cold air. They found a deer carcass not far from the trail, its body torn open by sharp teeth. Jason knelt beside it, inspecting the wounds. "Wolf," he confirmed, standing. But not just one. This was a pack. Elena's heart lifted and sank in the same moment. If Ash had found a pack, he wasn't alone. But he was also a greater target. Packs were harder to overlook, their presence more threatening to the farmers, who valued their livestock above all else. By late afternoon, the trail led them to a ridge overlooking a dense valley. Jason stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal her to be still. Eleanor followed his gaze and froze. Below them, a pack of wolves moved through the trees, their gray coats blending seamlessly with the landscape. At their center was a figure larger than the rest, his movements fluid and commanding. Ash. Elena's breath caught in her throat. He was magnificent, his body lean and powerful, his scarred leg barely noticeable as he led the pack through the snow. She wanted to call out to him, but her voice died on her lips. This wasn't the Ash she had nursed back to health, the cub who had followed her around the cabin with wide, trusting eyes. This was a wolf in his prime, wild and untouchable. As they watched, the wind shifted, carrying their scent down into the valley. The wolves stopped, their heads snapping toward the ridge. Ash's ears pricked forward, his body tense as his eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the sound of a rifle cracked through the air, shattering the silence. Panic surged through Elena as she scanned the trees below, searching for the source. The wolves scattered, their sleek forms disappearing into the underbrush. Ash lingered for a heartbeat longer, his gaze never leaving hers, before he, too, vanished. "Hunters," Jason muttered, already moving toward the edge of the ridge. "We need to move." Elena followed, her heart pounding as they descended into the valley. The snow made it slow going, each step a struggle as they pushed deeper into the forest. They found no sign of the hunters, but the tension in the air was palpable, the forest holding its secrets close. As night fell, they set up camp once more, the fire a small beacon against the encroaching darkness. Elena stared into the flames, her mind racing. Ash was out there, somewhere, and she had no idea how to reach him. But she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't stop until she did. The night was alive with shadows, the firelight flickering against the towering trees as Elena sat beside Jason, her thoughts a tangled web of worry and determination. The memory of Ash's eyes meeting hers on the ridge replayed over and over, each detail vivid. The tension in his body, the flicker of recognition, the sound of the gunshot fracturing the moment. She could still feel the weight of his gaze, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite decipher. Was it fear, trust, a silent goodbye? She clenched her fists, the resolve within her sharpening like the cold bite of the night air. She hadn't come this far to leave without answers. At first light, they broke camp, their movements quick and efficient. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual hum of life subdued as if the wilderness itself was holding its breath. Jason took the lead, his rifle slung over his shoulder, while Elena followed, scanning the snow for tracks. The memory of the pack lingered in her mind, their unity a testament to survival in the wild. If Ash had found his place among them, why had he lingered when he saw her? The question gnawed at her, pulling her deeper into her thoughts as they pressed onward. Hours passed before they found signs of the wolves again. Tracks crisscrossed the snow, their patterns chaotic, as though the pack had scattered in all directions. Among them were human boot prints, heavy and deliberate, weaving through the wolf tracks like a predator stalking its prey. Elena's pulse quickened, a mix of fear and anger rising in her chest. The hunters were closer than she'd hoped. "Here," Jason said, kneeling beside a patch of disturbed snow. He pointed to a trail leading into the denser forest, the tracks larger and more spaced out. "This one's moving alone. Could be him." Elena didn't hesitate, her steps quickening as they followed the trail. The forest grew darker, the trees thickening around them until the sunlight barely pierced the canopy. The air was heavy, each breath clouding in front of her as the chill deepened. The tracks led them to a narrow ravine, its walls steep and jagged, and at the bottom, she saw him. Ash stood alone, his fur glinting silver in the weak sunlight, his body tense as he stared down a figure on the other side of the ravine. A hunter, rifle raised, his stance steady as he aimed directly at Ash. Time seemed to freeze, every sound muffled except for the pounding of Elena's heart. Without thinking, she shouted, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "Stop!" The hunter flinched, his grip faltering as he turned toward the sound. Elena scrambled down the slope, her boots slipping on the loose snow as she made her way toward Ash. Jason was close behind, his hand on his rifle, though he made no move to draw it. The hunter lowered his weapon, his face a mixture of confusion and anger, as he shouted back, "What are you doing? That wolf's been killing livestock. He's a danger." Elena reached the bottom of the ravine, placing herself between Ash and the hunter. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her chest heaving as she held up her hands. "He's not a danger. He's just trying to survive like any other creature out here. You don't have to do this." The hunter hesitated, his eyes darting between her and Ash. Jason stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "She's right. Killing him won't solve your problem. There's a balance here, and we're part of it whether we like it or not." Ash stood still, his amber eyes locked on Elena. She could see the tension in his body, the way his muscles quivered with the instinct to run. But he stayed, his trust in her holding him in place. Slowly, she turned to face him, her voice soft and steady. "It's okay," she said, stepping closer. "I'm here." Ash lowered his head, his ears flicking back as he let out a low whine. Elena reached out, her fingers brushing against his fur, and in that moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her touch, strong and steady, a reminder of everything they had been through together. The moment was shattered by a sudden roar, deep and guttural, echoing through the ravine. Elena spun around to see a massive grizzly bear emerging from the trees, its dark eyes fixed on them. The hunter cursed, raising his rifle, but the bear was already charging, its sheer size and speed a terrifying blur. Ash moved first, leaping in front of Elena with a snarl that echoed through the ravine. The rest of the pack appeared as if summoned by his call, their forms emerging from the shadows to flank him. Together they launched themselves at the bear, their coordinated attack a testament to their bond. The bear roared in fury, swiping at the wolves with claws that carved deep into the earth. But the pack was relentless, their movements swift and precise. Jason grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her back as the battle raged. The hunter stood frozen, his rifle hanging uselessly at his side, his eyes wide with disbelief. Elena could only watch, her heart in her throat as Ash led the charge, his snarls fierce and unyielding. The fight felt like it lasted forever, though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Finally, the bear retreated, its massive form disappearing into the forest, with a final, furious roar. The wolves stood their ground, their breaths heavy, their bodies marked with scratches and bites. Ash turned to look at Elena, his chest heaving, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The hunter lowered his rifle, his expression softening as he took a step back. "I didn't know," he murmured, his voice trailing off. Jason nodded, his gaze fixed on the wolves. "Now you do." Word of the encounter spread quickly, thanks to Jason's photographs and the hunter's testimony. The town's perception of Ash and his pack shifted, their bravery earning them a grudging respect. Elena became an advocate for wildlife conservation, sharing her story at town meetings and community events. She spoke of balance, of the delicate thread that connected them all to the wilderness around them. Ash remained a part of her life, though their encounters grew fewer as the seasons passed. He would appear at the edge of the forest, his amber eyes watching her from a distance before slipping back into the shadows. Each time Elena felt a pang of loss, but also a deep sense of gratitude. Their bond had changed her, taught her to see the world through different eyes, and she knew it would stay with her forever. The cabin no longer felt empty. It was filled with memories, with the echoes of paws on wooden floors, and the quiet understanding that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. As Elena stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she smiled. Somewhere out there, Ash was running free, a silent guardian of the wild, and she was at peace, knowing she had been a part of his story, just as he had been a part of hers.